afternoon. First of all, I want to give you a welcome to this important event of architecture. We are in the city of Porto, in the north of Portugal, one of the cities that most contributed to development this area in the country, in Europe and in the world. School of Porto, it's a movement and the best example to talk about this influence. To start, I would like to remember Portugal had municipal elections last weekend. Before the elections day, the surveys carried out in that period showed that housing is one of the biggest concerns of the Portuguese people. Yes, it's true. During the campaign, the candidates and party leaders defended many measures to give answers to housing problems. Here in Porto, just to know, 13% of the population live in social buildings. I would like to create a different subject here and relate this, all this to Recover and Resilient Plan. There is a challenge to all. Portuguese government created 3 programs to spend about 2,000 million euros in housing solutions. To move on, I put here in evidence another fact. A study developed by Journal of Public Health, published 5 years ago, showed a ranking of access monthly in winter in 30 European countries. Portugal appeared in 2nd place behind Malta with an average increase of 28% in deaths that occurred between December and March compared of those that occur in the warmer months. Cyprus, Spain, and Ireland followed. Countries in Southern Europe are facing many types of challenge as climate events, temperatures and others, and desertification. The new European Bauhaus wants to give some answers and promote closer cooperation and co-design between the countries of the South to face their common problems and the challenge, and create a common platform to have solutions to all them together. Yes, togetherness. Some examples: develop social and nature-based measures with sustainability, accessibility, inclusion, and aesthetics. So this community and architecture groups, universities, in particular, must have faced this and includes those subjects in their works. A new chapter has already started, and today we'll continue it. To start, I would like to present to you the vice-rector of University of Porto, Fátima Vieira, to give you some words about what we'll do today.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's really my great pleasure on behalf of the Rector of the University of Porto to welcome you to this virtual platform where the 3rd session of the new European Bauhaus Goes South is to take place. We humans need metaphors. We need metaphors to think more deeply. We need metaphors to make sense of the world around us, to explain and then understand complex concepts. We need metaphors to connect with each other and to shape our thought processes. Metaphors, they communicate connections, associations, connotations, and they make us understand new ideas by comparing them to something we already know. So metaphors represent an imaginative leap that stretches how we think and enlarges our frame of reference. And over the last year, the new European Bauhaus became a powerful image. It became, I would say, a dynamic metaphor for the sort of society we need to construct. And it contributed to the public perception of what architecture is capable of doing and of what we need or what we expect architecture to do. So when the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, first talked about the need for a new European Bauhaus, she was offering us, in fact, a new metaphor, a new metaphor for life in society. And she made very clear what she expected from architecture. An architecture integrating different forms of art, relying on socially functional design, an architecture experimenting with new materials and digital tools, concerned with searching for new modes of production, an architecture capable of renewing communities, renewing crafts and small-scale industries and businesses, an architecture with this capacity for reconfiguring the urban landscape, proposing a new understanding of leisure and encouraging communities to more satisfying ways of living, more satisfying ways of working and relating to each other. So the Bauhaus very soon became a metaphor for our capacity for imagining new possibilities for human living. And I would say that now, with this new European Bauhaus Goes South, with this series of seminars, we have another powerful metaphor. And it is about the imagination of how this ethics of care, how they may be understood and implemented in Southern Europe. So the new European Bauhaus Goes South requires complex thinking. How can we reconcile this new set of values that will hopefully reinvigorate our idea of Europe with locally based approaches to the needs of our communities? So we human beings, we do need powerful metaphors to inspire collective imagination and collective action. We need metaphors to provide us with a horizon towards which we want to walk. So the houses that we want to build are also to be understood as metaphors for the communities that we want, for the communities that we urgently need to construct. And that is why this series of events comprising lectures and workshops is so important. So European Bauhaus Goes South is about our future, and the buildings in discussion here, the houses and the housing question that will be discussed today, they are all critical metaphors for the regeneration that we aspire to, the generation of our communities, of our human and natural resources, and of our financial capital. So this certainly is a difficult mission, but I would say that it has been trusted to the most capable hands. I've almost finished, but allow me a final word to say that I'm really glad that the Academy is getting involved in this process of transformation. It sure is about time that universities heard for the creation of public policies. And I'm glad to see that these events involve not only senior researchers, but also junior researchers and students from several countries from Europe. And so I finished by congratulating the organizing committee of this new European Bauhaus Goes South for this series of events. I congratulate universities involved for taking on this social responsibility of promoting a discussion that will be for the benefit of us all. I wish all the delegates a very productive day. And I take on the opportunity to present, on behalf of the Rector of the University of Porto, special compliments to Professor Gonçalo Birne, President of the Portuguese Board of Architects, to which I would like to add my own best private greetings, saying that I'm really looking forward to listening to his keynote. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fátima Vieira. After you, I will present João Pedro Xavier, Dean of Faculty of Architecture from University of Porto. I say welcome to you, and I would like to hear some words from you also.
Good afternoon to everyone. Dear Vice Rector Fátima Vieira, thank you so much for your words. Dear Director of our Research Center, José Miguel Rodrigues. Dear Coordinator of Porto NEB Goes South event, Teresa Calix. Dear coordinators of the other local teams, Deborah, Remy, Francesco, Mia, and Riva, all good friends too. Dear member of the Scientific Committee, dear keynotes, my dear friend Gonçalo Birne, thank you so much for being here. And Carlos Bajas from Lacal Architects. Dear moderators and facilitators of the parallel sessions, dear participants of the roundtable Next Steps, Carmen Spegel, Filipa Roseta, Gonçalo Birne, and Vasco Freitas, dear students, colleagues, and attendants. Thanks for your participation. It's an immense pleasure to have you here. Actually, without you, this won't be possible. This is the second event of NEB GOES SOUTH platform, broadcasted from Porto, aiming at discussing the question of housing under the light of the new European Bauhaus principles on sustainability, inclusion, and beauty. 4 more events will follow, as you probably know: Framing Collectivity in Zagreb, the Maiotics of the City in Bologna, Kilometer Zero Architecture in Valencia, and Geo-Biosource Architecture in Toulouse. After these monthly events, NEB GOES SOUTH will conclude with a set of architectural design workshops, blended intensive programs, happening simultaneously in our countries, putting together students and teachers from the 6 architecture schools of this consortium. Along with these thematic discussions and then giving shape to architectural ideas through actual design proposals that will emerge from the workshops, we hope to learn all together how to design and build a more sustainable, inclusive, and beautiful environment, and how education can play a decisive role in supporting the necessary change. Today, we are willing to discuss the question of housing, directing our attention to the problems that affect, in particular, our southern countries. We still need to provide a house for everybody, for those without decent housing. In Portugal, nearly 26,000 families do not have a proper home. And for those that are forced to move from other continents and countries, the pressure in Greece, Italy, and even in France is quite intense, or our own population in economically unfavorable conditions. We must be aware that these migrations will be increasingly related to climate change and not only to war conflicts around Europe, to which we have to use all our skills to attenuate. But at the same time, we must take care of the houses already built. In Portugal, according to a 2018 inquiry, 94% of the population reported that they were unable to keep their home adequately warm, which is notably higher than the average of the European Union. And from the Recovery Plan for Europe, the famous PRR as it is known in Portugal, and that Estelle has already talked about it, we can only expect enough fundings to optimize the energy efficiency of no more than 326 buildings and 100,000 paychecks to support families living in these poor conditions. Furthermore, we must be more demanding in designing the dwellings that are still missing. I recall what I said at Athens event about designing with the landscape. The new European Bauhaus wave is counting on us as architects, along with society, to use our ability to build places for living, giving them the sense of belonging, safety, comfort, harmony with nature, and incredible beauty, from the single house to the landscape. Today, we shall explore the question of housing, wondering why housing is still a question, like in Friedrich Engels' times. I wish Aldous Huxley was not right when he stated that, and I quote, "The only lesson we take from history is that no one has learned the lessons of history." Actually, what we see is that problems have increased, diversified, and become even more complex, being aware that, as George Orwell warned, to be able to see what is in front of our eyes requires a constant fight. We really need to reimagine a sustainable and affordable living, allowing each the right to their right house, to create resilient housing, adaptable to new ways of life, to value our environment and local cultures. Housing remains a central question in the construction of our common future. The question of housing, if fundamentally transformed, requires today as before an answer that goes further than the individual action. It depends on our cooperation in the construction of holistic solutions for an inclusive and sustainable tomorrow. I wish us all a fruitful afternoon with plenty of new ideas. Let's do it together. Thanks.
Thank you, João Pedro Xavier. I would like to thank you to all of you that are listening to these members that are making the introduction of this session this Wednesday. After João Pedro Xavier, the director of Center of Architecture and Urban Studies from University of Porto, José Miguel Rodrigues, will make a speech to you.
Okay, good afternoon to all. I will say a few brief words as I was asked, my own at the beginning, and then I will end by quoting, and I will announce the citation, of course, remembering the thinking of a master and a past professor of our school, without whom the Architecture School of Porto would not have been what it is today. But of course, I'd like to start by welcoming among us the presence . Okay. Thank you. I think now you can see an image. Okay. Can you confirm me, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. As I was saying, I'd like to start by welcoming among us the presence of our Vice Rector, Professora Fátima Vieira, and the President of the Order of Architects, Professor and Architect Gonçalo Bino. It is really an honor to feel their presence in this event so important for our school. The initiative of co-creation of a new European Bauhaus space is an opportunity and a challenge, I think. A rare opportunity that will allow us to put architecture, design, and art on behalf of society in an expressive manner and on a European scale, in the face of a novel challenge that the President of the European Commission has outlined for us to continue. A challenge insofar as we are all at the crossroads in the face of the challenges of environmental sustainability, of doubt, debate, discussion, not so much about the objectives that move us, fairly consensual, I think, but more about how to pursue and achieve it. I would say that in the art I deal with, the architecture, the how is surely the most important, since what is not our exclusive matter, others with us, will help to outline the premises of that inclusive and sustainable future that at some stage someone will have to design, give shape, and finally, in the end, create the space and the structure to develop the necessary activities, which somehow has to be built. Without architects, I think, without architects, artists, and designers, the world of artifacts does not take shape or matter. And as despite so much virtual reality, human life is essentially real and physical, as the pandemic has proved, on my point of view. And so there is no escape from the agents, from us architects and designers, of material transformation of the sustainably manufactured and built things that allow us to survive on the planet we have, namely us, the architects, the designers, or the urban planners and singers, I underline. Of all the artifacts I can think of, housing is perhaps the most persistent, from my point of view, conservative, but even this must be discussed. Elementary and indispensable throughout this positive, I think. That is why all the constitutions of modern democratic states protect it. Protect housing as an absolute universal right. Once again, the question of how we are going to do it becomes important. How are you going to do this transformation? I mean, in part, and perhaps the debate today raises this question, which is also an answer, stating that it will be through reconstruction and renovation. But in my opinion, and we will also see it, I hope, on the debate, the question is far from being resolved exclusively in this way. As Fernando Tavra, the first to see Caesar's talent, once said, how can we begin by the end? Let us start, as seems logical, by the beginning, and from there will result the architecture and urbanism that is necessary for our moment and our space. Individuality does not vanish like smoke, and if we possess it, we will lose nothing in studying. I have, and that late Tavra idea, the possibility of networking ourselves through the idea of a new European Bauhaus. The situation, he said, admits only two alternatives, either to move forward or to stagnate in the chaos in which we find ourselves. Faced with this dilemma, we decided to choose the first position, with the strong hope that it is the only possible one for those who were born to increase to the past something of the present and some possibilities for the future. For those for whom living is to create something new, not by the stupid, bizarre desire to be different, but by the imperious determination of life that does not admit any stop or any stagnation, except under a price that posterity will not forgive us. I quote Fernando Tavra. May these hypotheses, that of a new European Bauhaus to be born and to connect the south of Europe, where we are now, allow us a beautiful debate of ideas, and finally, some light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you very much. I wish you all a great debate.
So we will follow at this moment with another figure. You already said his name, Gonçalo Birnes, he's at this moment the president of Portuguese Board of Architects. Is an architect graduate from the School of Fine Arts of Lisbon, holding an honorary degree from the Faculty of Architecture of Technical University of Lisbon and from the Faculty of Architecture of Alghero. Birne has been teaching at several international universities. As I say, Birne is currently the president of National Board of the Ordem dos Arquitetos. I give you welcome also to this big reunion, and I would like to say that it's a pleasure to be here to listen from words that I think they will inspire, increase this collective awareness to urgent questions related with housing. Wow.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I want to salute to the previous speakers, starting with the Vice Rector Fatima Vieira and her fascinating appeal about metaphor, which I think is a very important figure for architecture. I mean, we are living quite often on this universe of creating metaphors for designing architecture is very interesting. So many times have the capacity of transforming crises into opportunities. And this is one of the typical issues which are quite used to this procedure. We have, of course, many other characteristics, which I will talk a little bit further on about. But also I'd like to salute Jean-Pierre Chevier. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's you've touched most of the issues that are on stake on this going ground, and of course Jean-Miguel Rodrigues, and also quoting Fernando Tavares, so many other so important architects, mostly from the School of Oporto. I would start to saying that this NEB, European Bauhaus, goes south, for me is already quite a challenge. As you know, European Bauhaus was a typical European-centered initiative. And the new European Bauhaus is something that is based on some of the goals of the European 1917 European Bauhaus, but of course with a wide, a large and a very sort of ambitious perspective. But what I'd like to say, I'm here talking in a dual condition, which for me is quite difficult to take apart and to separate, which is, by one side, mostly architect with some practice, not few years of practice. As a consequence of that, I have been teaching around always on the design and project area, and always as a visiting professor. And simultaneously, I temporarily now have this role of being the dean or the chair of the professional order of the Portuguese architects, in a very demanding and a very challenging situation. In fact, our world is going under very, very deep transformations and very vital transformations and very vital challenges. Just to give a fast looking back into what has been happening in our country related to the housing problem, I would like to say very briefly that maybe mostly of the young students who are present don't know, but Portugal was for almost close to half a century a dictatorship until 1974, where you finally had fought and really founded a democracy, and with a very strong beginning on the housing issue, with a very interesting answer and methodology about how to react to widespread slum areas on the peripheral cities, on the periphery of the cities, where the conditions of life were very, very precarious and not tremendously bad. And this program, which went on for at least 4 years, involved a very deep participation and dialogue between architects, engineers, planning teams, and the local residents and their forms of association. This theme of participation, which looks forward into a vision of inclusiveness, is one of the main issues of the, as you know, of the NEB, New European Bauhaus. This was 1974. I've been involved in one of these operations in Setúbal for almost 4 to 5 years. Then it just finished. and then some cooperatives initiative went on. But in the middle of the 80s, there is a total absence of public authorities and public politics on being present on the social housing issue. And this absence was covered by total private initiative of banking, with a low profit rate, affordability, which created some positive conditions, because it was so cheap to get a loan from the bank that people would in a cheaper way buy an apartment than rent an apartment. But the consequences of these politics after 20 years, and these politics went up to quite recently, three very negative consequences. The very first one was, in fact, the renting market almost disappeared. Second consequences was not exactly the American sprawl, but the mosaic, fragmentary growth of urban peripheries, because urban developers were, of course, looking for cheap terrains to build without any coherent urban planning. So there were mosaics of peripheries where people would afford a cheap house for living, but of course, paying the price of long distance to work and long time distance to places where they work. So this was, it has been happening in every city in Portugal, not only the two big metropolitan areas of Lisbon or Porto, but even in middle-sized and small-sized cities. And the third consequences of this sort of fragmentary, speedy growth of peripheries had another consequences, which was almost a desertification, the emptiness of the historical centers and the traditional central areas of the cities, which had already had a previous problem, mostly visible in the main cities, which had been before monofunctionalizing, I mean, housing, removing from the center becoming mostly what is called the CBD politics, central business district, means office areas mostly, and housing going to the peripheries. But lately, in fact, even the office areas, the CBD, went away into more peripheral clusters. So we had tremendous, and we're still suffering from that, from the voiding of the historical centers. Okay, so this triple situation, which we are still trying to recover, I think it has been shared not only in Portugal, but mostly in some Mediterranean countries. I've heard that Greece had quite a similar problem, but also Italy, and in certain way also Spain. This situation from, I should say, from the early middle new century, beginning of the new century, so from 1905 to 1910. Of course, 1910 we have this tremendous economical and financial crisis, which again was very problematic, with the building industry almost stopped and lots of problems with architecture. And finally, of course, things are now changing due to this consequences of the Paris Agreement, which are now translated into the heavy finance programs like the PRR, the Renovation and Resilience Program, which is recovering and re-injecting public intervention in the housing situation. Of course, housing situation is not just an issue of producing housing in dignified conditions for people to live within. It's also an urban issue. It's housing is also talking of the city. Housing, it makes no sense of talking of buildings without talking about the relationship between buildings, the relationship with the public space, and of course, with other issues of the void system, the void pattern systems of the city, which of course are also trying to change. Mostly exactly 100 years after the 1917 foundation of the European Bauhaus, which was the establishment of the new patterns of the new architecture of the modern age, as I told you before, it is a typical Central Europe phenomenon. And it's a phenomenon that is exactly following the very first World War and coming out of the very first world pandemics of the Spanish flu. And exactly 100 years after, we're not coming out, fortunately, of a world war, but eventually we are coming out of a more terrible situation. The climatic crisis, it's of course, I think João Pedro told about the dilemma, or maybe I'm sorry, I think it was José Manuel Rodrigues, about the dilemma of letting stay things like they are or just react. I don't think we have this dilemma. I mean, the climate change problems, and of course, I'm not a negationist. I think, of course, there's people that still don't believe, but the climate crisis, it's either reversed or we go all together into a common suicide situation, in a common share situation. So this sort of menace that we have on our horizon is not giving, in my opinion, any sort of dilemma. Either we react to it or we will go into a dead end. But of course, climate reaction, which is already creating and is being treated even before the pandemic situation of COVID-19, it's an incredible change for everyone. And because, in fact, we are turning from a heritage of modernity. The European Bauhaus is creating the models of what we call the carbonic culture and carbonic society. And the challenge of the post-climate is to get out from the carbonic, produce what really culture and civilization of the carbonic world produced, and transforming into a post-carbonic situation, together with the post-pandemic situation. And the dimension of this challenge is really incredible. And of course, it touched architecture, and it touched every dimension of the humankind living together. Ultimately, architecture means, of course, to configure, to give form, to give spaces with metaphor, with all the materials that we have. But ultimately, architecture thinking, because it's mostly a mental practice, and we are on the side not of the nature but of the artifact. And this is also interesting because we have the artifact dimension has to make a compulsory, I should say, switch into a renaturalization vision of the artifact, because the crisis is also a consequence of a non-balanced artificial artifact production. So the new paradigms that architecture has in front of them, they are really tremendous and challenging. We are talking mostly of new cultural paradigms, but we are talking, of course, of energetical new conditions of renewable energies. We are talking of new economical paradigms. We have to understand that the endless resource economy cannot be an endless resource economy, and we have to start switching into circular economy. We have to intensively start using the prefix re, no? But of course, it's also a very social. When you talk of sustainability, these paradigms touch every world, and of course, social new paradigms are also very important because no one can stay out of this challenge. And all the decisions of territorial decisions, city decisions, architectural decisions, housing decisions, either are inclusive or they won't be at all. We cannot leave anyone behind. And we are talking of architecture right now. And ultimately, we are talking what is ultimately the goal of architecture is to mentally think, design, project, and build life containers. We are talking about living city of people. Living cities have lots of other cities within, no? We have the heritage city, which means the memory, the identity, and so on. But we, of course, together we have the living city with all the enormous problematic issues that are, maybe the city is the most complex humankind creation a long times. And this is very important. And now we are facing these issues. And of course, we talk a lot about the Anthropocene new geological period, which is, of course, in my opinion, very, very, we cannot declare the beginning of a geological period, which is translated in centuries, hundreds of centuries, or even millions of years. But we must start talking about new Anthropocene, because the existing Anthropocene production is not the good one. And ultimately, as astrophysics say, there is no planet B. We have to solve this in our own planet. So the big challenge for architecture and talking about housing, we have to get back to the eco concept, which is sustainability, but it is the housing, the new house for transform the new European Bauhaus into the new common shared house, and topos, which means the relation to the site where it is built. And of course, this we are talking in a condition where society and culture is very much on the very how do you say, a very short-viewed perspective, mostly technocratic and mercantile. And these two conditions, which I'm not contesting, technology, of course, is very important, but technology should not be transferred into an ideology or even to a religion. And mercantile markets are, of course, important, but they have to be, in a way, reeled markets into a new perspective, as we told before, and all the forms of knowledge are called here. So architectural decisions at 3 levels, and I've shortly finished. But the very, very first level is the main decisions on about form, space, living space, conditions, environmentals, atmospheres, which are supposed to contain life. This is the very first level of decisions of the designing of a house. Then you have a second level, which we're talking of the passive conditions of thermal insulation, of light insulations, whatever, which can be reduced even dealing with low-techs and not only high-techs in particular climate situations. For instance, inertia, thermal inertia is important. And ultimately, we have the top decisions about high-techs, which are mostly domotics. I mean, thermal conditions, controlling, etc., etc. This, if you go to economic, cost conditions, this sort of 3 mastaba levels are the opposite, because the third level, not only, of course, it's necessary, but it depends on energy because it's an active level, and it has another consequence, which is should be thought, which means the high technology level is an accelerator, an extremely accelerator of obsolescence, of long-term living. So it will be costly to depend mostly on the high level. And when we are thinking of long life cycles of living and contrasting and fighting against against demolition, and mostly talking about rehabilitation and so on, we have to deal with all these issues. Of course, architecture is a holistic approach of knowledge. Architecture is transdisciplinary basis, and it mostly a dialogue basis. So I think architecture as a form of knowledge on the open call of the European Bauhaus, which was an incredible, tremendous surprise from our European Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen. It's a real challenge, and I think it could and should be an occasion to recenter a form of knowledge which is, I should say, particularly suited to this sort of dialogical, holistic approach that is contained on the European Bauhaus appeal. So thank you very much. I'm sorry it was a bit too long.
Thank you so much, Professor Gonçalo Birne. And I would like to say it was a pleasure to listen to some historic facts and to push our memory to discuss about housing in Portugal, how it was the evolution from this subject and the new domains to discuss, and that's what we are doing today. I have a lot of questions in my mind that I'm transforming subjects in questions, and in a few minutes we will talk about that. After this speech, local architects, they will talk with us a little bit about some problematics, and this is a local architects is a cooperative of architects established in 2009 in the neighborhood of Sants in Barcelona. They work to generate community infrastructures for the sustainability of life as a key tool for the eco-social transition through architecture, cooperativism, and participation. This is a good point to ask some things to you after this. Local architects, they encourage, among others, debate and discussion on the uses of spaces and the management of urban spaces, city models, participation, and the recovery of heritage. So many things to do together, and this urgent mission to architecture. Local architects, they will give us some notes about this work and about some ideas to nowadays and future about the housing question.
Well, hello, thank you for the invitation. And I'm very happy that I speak after Gonzalo Birne, because I think I will, well, the thing I will explain relates a lot, or to us it was always an inspiration, the SAL, the Servicio Ambulatorio de Apoyo Local, which was an amazing period of time, we think, and that we would love to see again in our cities, or to be applied in our cities, because it was never the case here in Spain. Also very challenging questions that he was posing. I will share a presentation because for us, we are not very theoretical based, we are very practical based, although we do read and write. But the way we try to change our environment is through our work mostly, even if it's work to be kind of exemplary or to show other alternatives. And this is probably the case that is being more published, La Borda, the housing cooperative. Today I only have like 15 minutes, so I will just share 3 ideas, but using the project as an example. But you have multiple talks that we gave longer about this project in YouTube, so if you're more interested, you can look there. And I wanted to put emphasis on this title, no? Like that for us, sustainability, the challenge is to make it affordable and for all, no? And not make something that can be green, can be sustainable, can maybe go back to a better environment, but it's not then affordable, no? That leaves people out, that it's not accessible, that it's not inclusive to different types of living and different communities, different people. So the case of La Borda is a housing cooperative. It's the first of its kind here in Barcelona, because it's going to be always a cooperative. It's not going to be sold into individual units. It's always being managed by the cooperative, and it's on a piece of land that belongs to the municipality. So it's actually social housing. So the rent is controlled, and the prices have to be affordable and very low. I don't have time to go deep on that, but because I'm going to be talking a lot on the social aspect, I must say that this project actually comes from the reclaiming of this area of Can Batlló, a former factory that people organize, and since 2011, the community is managing all this area here in red as a social center, places for work, places for culture. And from this project, a group of people organized, worried on the question of housing, which has been always, for all the Spanish history, it's been problematic. So they try to propose an alternative based on other projects, on cooperative housing. Just the 3 ideas that I wanted to mention today, on this idea related to sustainability, but also affordability or accessibility. So the way we work with it is basically using the users, like involving the users with participation, but also with their active role in the building. Then the importance of sustainability, but based on the comfort and that people can live in a decent environment. And finally, the way we do it, or one of the ways we do it to make it affordable, also is reducing the demand. First of all, this idea of the importance of the active user. No, so here we are in a particular situation, which is collective housing, where we have the user from the very beginning, so we can discuss with them, which is not the common situation in nowadays. No, so this, because of this history I told you of the group emerging from this area, led us into their involvement, no, and ask them how they wanted to live, how they imagined to live, and also not only discussing and participating with them, no, but also having discussions with them and teaching them all the things that maybe they never questioned, or maybe things they didn't know. For instance, here, this is when the building was finished, we were doing kind of a training to the users on how they had to use their housing in order to work properly, because it might seem quite obvious, no, like you enter to your house and everything works, but in this case, for instance, in summer, when it's very hot outside, you need to close the windows so that the heat doesn't get into the house, which is already cool, no? And maybe when you're hot in summer and you don't have AC, which is the case of this building, the first thing that comes to your mind is to open the window, no? So here we needed to explain the user things that might be a little bit counterintuitive, but if they don't know how to use it, they will eventually install AC because they will be hot in summer in this case, no? So we were explaining them. So this is also part of the equation for us, that we managed to make sustainable, or the most sustainable buildings as we can, that are not expensive, because we rely not in high tech, in super expensive machines that maybe have some obsolescence, that maybe are patented, that are maybe excluding certain communities or causing other problems elsewhere, but we are relying on people. We rely in a very heavy basis as much as we can. So here in this case, the community also wanted to participate in the construction work. This was something that we learned from the case of Uruguay, from the housing cooperatives there. And here it was only a very small cases, but for instance, the flooring of certain areas was done reusing the materials that were discarded by the main constructor, and putting them together to make some of the flooring. This also makes people very aware of the building where they live, and it makes them very aware of the importance of maintenance. No, so this building has, from day one, they saved money to maintain and to upgrade the building in the future. No, so this is been inhabited for 3 years now, and it wasn't until this year that they installed the solar panels, because the money was not there yet. No, so there's certain things that can be added to the future because they were not possible to be done in the first stage, but also this idea of having in mind the importance of maintenance so that the building works properly. Second aspect is this idea of comfort, no, especially. So when we talk about sustainability, it's obviously because we care about the planet, and we agree with all the things that were said, but also because we care about people. Because we knew the group who was going to live there, we were able to study and to study how people lived before moving there. And we saw that more than half of the people were in a situation of energy poverty. No? So it doesn't mean that the electric company or the gas company cut their bills or the service because they didn't pay the bills. But it meant, for instance, that many people, they were living in apartments that were not well isolated because they were very old. They had no central heating, and they had to put electric heating. And Spain has the most expensive electricity in Europe. So in winter, they didn't heat their houses because they could not afford energy prices. So even if they were not aware, these people were in an energy poverty situation. So for us, when we talk about sustainability and comfort is also because we want to make buildings that are responsive, or that are give response to everybody's needs without depending from energy prices, without depending from consuming resources from outside of the building. You know? So this is what we did, you know, with this proposal of this building. In these graphics, you see every time on the left is what the current housing stock in Spain is doing. In the middle, what the current regulation on building asks us to do, and on the right is what we did or we proposed. So when it comes to energy consumption, we managed to cut half the demands of the regulation, and even more from the current stock, especially when it comes to heating. And now after 3 years, we've been monitoring the building, and we've been even doing some adjustments, some tuning, and performance has been improving. So probably it's even lower than that nowadays. When it comes to CO2 emissions for the materials, especially because we use CLT panels for the structure, we are very, again, less than half. And because of the same, the material, it has to be dismantled in 100 years or whatever, 90% of it can be recycled easily. When it comes to water, we also wanted to apply certain saving measures and collecting rainwater, but at the end, because of economic constraints, it was not possible, and for the moment. But this, we're doing it in newer projects. We're introducing this water reduction of consumption as well. So very basically, we're working with bio design, or designing with very basic, or taking into account the environment and in this case the plot we had. So here in this section, the south would be on the left. So we have an almost perfect south on the left. So as you see, most of the mass of the building goes to the left, facing south. The floor ceiling height is very high for a conventional housing stock building. So it's like 3.03 meters. This way we have the sun entering until the end of the building. So 24 of the 28 units are facing south, and those barely don't have to use the central heating. The 4 that are on the right face north, and they are the few that have to use central heating. And then we have the central corridor that reads from the traditional architecture in the center and in the south of the peninsula, which this typology called corralas. So all the private and public spaces face this corridor and this patio that is covered with a winter house. So it's actually keeping the heat in winter, but also because of this patio is also enhancing the social encounter with your neighbors. This is the most high-tech part of the building, because it's the only part that goes with it opens or closes depending on the sun heat and depending on the temperature and wind, but all the rest depends on user. And very traditional, very conventional and low-tech mechanism to keep sun outside in summer and inside in winter. No, it's not here. It's not so complicated to work well. But as you see in the left in this image, this is a building that was finished just before us in a very similar location, and without balconies, without any work on this regard. No, and obviously for us, like north and south facade had to be very different, because the conditions here is going to be a future park, and here you have street, no direct sunlight, so the facade needed to be different. And as I mentioned, the solar panels that were added just this year. When it comes to materials, we also managed to convince or work with the community to choose wood as a structure material. This was more expensive than the conventional materials, which would be concrete, but obviously the the gain when it comes to sustainability was outstanding. And also we managed to make it not so much expensive because we shortened the construction times. No, the structure was built only in 6 weeks with 4 people working on it. Every week there was a new floor, and when it was finished, it was the tallest wood building in Spain. Now there's another one that has 1 floor more, and obviously the wood performance speaks for itself. And I wanted to use the last minutes to talk about this concept that for us is very important. No, this idea of reducing the demand. We always have in mind this idea of Pier Vittorio Aureli of less is enough. No, like not less is more, not less is less. Less is enough. No, what do we need to live and live properly and live happily? No, so here also, because we knew who was going to live there, we could talk with them and propose how to live collectively and how to use resources more wisely. No, and this implies a lot of different aspects, especially when it comes to different typologies of families, of how people live in Spain. More than half of the population live alone or with another person, but we still produce houses for big families with a lot of bedrooms. No, so there is this mismatch on what we produce. And also when we talk about housing, there's a lot of things that we do in houses and that have a lot of impact. So here we decided, we discussed all these issues that we do in housing, and we discussed with the community where we wanted to do it. We wanted to do it in your own unit, with some of the units, with the community, or we don't even need it in the building because it's already present in the neighborhood. So we shrink it a little bit, the size of the units, like 10 meters, and we have more than 300 square meters of, or around 300 square meters of community spaces that are covered, and some that are open. So we have this kitchen dining room, even if the units have their own kitchen. We have a laundry, we have guest rooms, we will have health space and a multi-purpose room, plus bike parking, courtyards, the terraces, and storage. No, why do we think it's important to share? No, because we are more efficient, we use less resources. In the case of the washing machines, it's very direct forward. No, it's very straightforward. They are more efficient. We need less machines. We need less space for machines, and so on. And also, we share more, and it's like a feminist point of view. No, like sharing the duties and making them more visible and making them to be done not only by one person but for more people at the same time. This is the communal dining room, where now every week there's a communal meal for all the community, and you can also book for your own private parties or whatever. And here you have the multi-purpose room, and at the end of the stairs you have 2 guest rooms. So another idea here is that if we get together and we share, we can have kind of a common luxuries, things that you could not have on your own. But if you get together with others, you can enjoy these spaces without compromising affordability or the planet. And finally, another idea on reducing the demand is that this was the first building that managed not to build underground parking. We were discussing for 2 years with the municipality of Barcelona to change regulation that forced new buildings to build underground parking. Barcelona has more underground parking already than we already need. We have a very good system of public transportation. It's proof that most in social housing, people tend not to own a car in Barcelona. So we managed to change this regulation, and now this applies to all new constructions. So we think we made a lot of reducing the demand here when it comes to the space and the materials, but also when it comes to the mobility issues of the neighborhood. And just to mention, I don't have time to go deep on that because I'm already running late, I think, but that we also thought on how to the housing units can be flexible in the future, no? So that you don't need to change your house if your living situation changes. If your children live and you suddenly live by yourself and you don't need a bedroom, but the people next to you need this bedroom, these bedrooms, extra bedrooms that the apartments have, in this case will be here on the left, these bedrooms can be moved to one apartment to another very easily in just 2 days, changing the drywalls, changing the legal contract is already prepared also to be changed very quickly. So just last images of the interiors, so you can see also some images. And also because of that and because of the layout that we did, we have 28 units that all come from the same matrix, very actually very rigid matrix, but because of the flexibility that we let to the user and to the different spaces that we have, we allowed to 28 different houses. Now everyone could decide where to place the living room, where to place the bedroom, if they wanted to divide the bedroom into smaller spaces. So we have 28 completely different units that are able to accommodate different ways of living, not just this regular nuclear classic family. I'm sorry I spoke super fast. This is something that we do a lot here in Barcelona, but I wanted to have some times for discussion if there's still time.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was an interesting perspective from architecture and to see how our future can be in the Southern Europe. And after this, we don't have too much time to say much more things, but because we need to go on and to move to the questions and answers. If someone wants to make some questions to our memberships from this housing question, you can do it for sure. I think you will have good answers. But before that, and when we are expecting and to hear it from you, I would like to make a question to local architects. After your presentation, I would like you to say to me, it will be possible to make this model building in other countries in Southern Europe. It will be flexible to do that in the way you are making in Spain.
I think there is that this is a model that can be transferred in other places already. It's happening in Barcelona, in Spain, but no, in Spain is very diverse. Even when we talk about South, it has nothing to do with the central part of Spain, the mountains. It's very diverse climate, even culturally. But definitely, I think this showed that it's possible, no? Because even when we were talking about this project almost 10 years ago at the very beginning, and we were discussing this possibility, there was a lot of this response like, no, this is something from the north, something from Denmark, from Germany. Here in the south, we're Latin, we're different. And it's an answer that we hear many times, for instance, when we are discussing on making more bike lanes. And no, the answer is like, we are not Amsterdam. Well, Amsterdam was not Amsterdam neither, no? And I think it's the same in this case, like we need to prove that it's possible. And I think people will see it's possible and more people will be interested on that. Maybe it's not gonna be the majority and maybe, I think there's still room for other options, and we are not trying to propose this as a one only solution that fits all, but definitely I think that there is room for these typologies and these type of solutions. Yeah.
Gonçalo Birne, this next question is to you, because you explain us something good aspects and important aspects from historic housing in Portugal. And now we'd like to putting in evidence the cooperatives, because we are talking about that and a new vision from Spain. We saw that give us a different idea and perspective about living in community. Do you think it's possible to do that here in Portugal with our culture and our public intervention in this area of housing?
Of course, it's possible. But first of all, I absolutely have to congratulate Carlos, because I knew your architecture, of course, and I've been following it, and I'm very fond of it. I think you're making a very important statement to this sort of a new vision of how to deal with all the issues that are so important nowadays. Of course, it's possible to deal with community in our world. When I saw the presentation of Carlos and the importance of people who were already living in the area and were part of the community of this old heritage, industrial heritage precinct, that and when I saw them around a model, the very first model, I came all of a sudden very quickly to the image, some very similar images we used to share with the inhabitants of the Casal das Figueiras in 1975 with a SAL approach. And it's really amazing because the community sensibility, it exists. And of course, when we talk, the problem is that most of of course, I work in several other classical projects of so-called social housing. And the so-called social housing strategy doesn't have the direct contact with the future users, the future inhabitants. They are based on a sort of a portrait which talks mostly of statistics, of a sort of a model about how people live. And that is very typical of the philosophy of the housing as a machine habitée, like it has been the heritage of the modern movement. But nowadays we are moving to another paradigm, and the machine habitée is a typical heritage of the carbonic situation. I mean, it's a typical heritage, and it's good. I mean, it's accomplished its social housing. In that moment, it was very important. The courtyard image that Carl showed us, and the sharing of the space, it was already existing in the phalansterio of some sense of the 19th century. People living together, the sense of community. What is really here very important, that this community is part of the process of making of construction, where architects are, of course, involved, but they are part of the process, and this is one of the main challenge of the NEB. What is really amazing is that these experiences of L'École, they are several years before NEB. And now they seem to be, of course, they already, the demand of NEB, it is also part of a heritage that came even from the climatic and the post-carbonic demand. Okay, so the answer is, of course, it's possible.
Is there anyone to make a question? If it's not, I can go on with another because I have a lot of questions. In this moment, I would like to refer again to you, to Gonçalves, because of the expectations that exists about recovery and resilience plan, and they are high, as you know. What are the risks if we are not able to spend all the money in the housing area? I would like to remember in Portugal we have 2,000 euros, 2,000, I'm not sure. Yes, 2,000 euros, 2,000 million euros. Oh my God, yes, actually.
Million.
And in 3 programs, one of them is to spend in first housing, another in national and temporary housing, and public housing at affordable costs.
The question is to me about Portugal.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have an answer for that. I have mostly concerns about how this fund is going to be used. If you, the question, I tell you why, because when we move to try to dialogue with the public administration, the main answer is we are in a hurry. The question is so urgent that in fact, we feel that they're very far from discussing new typologies, discussing quality and architecture. They're mostly concerned on spending this amount with 26,000 houses, whatever it occurs, how no one speaks about quality, no one speaks about how people live, how communities work, what is the relationship between the building and the city and the public space, whatever. And this
Professor,
is really...
but what you are saying it's especially important because we don't have a lot of time to do that.
I know that, and the big drama is that in fact it's really, this is not an accusation to the government, because it's a product of several governments and decisions. But the public administration anyhow had some tools of working with the quality demand. As you know, housing is a constitutional right, but as the National Health Service, it's not just a question of numbers. National Service requires, and it required on the pandemic situation, that they have to answer in quality as well. It's not only the numbers. And what happens to public administration with all these several years and the absence of public policies of social and affordable housing, and I'm absolutely aware that this is not the exact portrait in Spain. Spain continued anyhow, bad or not so well, but the affordable housing existed. In Portugal, practically disappeared. There are some 2 or 3 programs that were implemented, but they had a very short effect. And so the question is that in fact there are no mechanisms to rule this. And of course, the Portuguese, the Order of Architects, we are making a tremendous effort to go to the municipal authorities, to the Câmaras Municipais, who's coordinating all this is the IRU, Instituto de Reabilitação Urbana. But of course, they also don't have so many means. They're making a very strong effort organize even competitions in architecture, but they say there's no time for competitions. And the main public, how do you call, way of making a contract for building is the only criteria is the lowest cost of the honoraries of how they will pay the design team. And it has been 80 to 90%. This is the model that is used. I mean, it's not the only model that is on the law, but there is the one that is used absolutely 80 to 90%. Who offers less? You have the command, you have the project. And of course, this is not absolutely a quality criteria to the design. This is, by the opposite, is promoting precarity and even dumping in the architectural practice. But that is another discussion. So I have big concerns. I hope things will increase. We have some bridges and some dialogues with the public administration, some good news as well, but the overall, and it's also true, these goals are not in practice. European community has a mechanism to ask the reimbursement of the funds. And if this is a true argument, there's also a big risk on this developing. So I'm sorry, I cannot be very optimistic, but I think this is a portrait that is really happening. We have big concerns about it and doing all our best that these things can provoke not such a big harm. Okay.
I would like to say thank you to you, Professor, and we are almost finished this part. But before, I would like to listen again, Carl, because of this directly question. It is possible to overcome the delay between the North and the South in Europe in this particular case of housing?
Well, here in Barcelona, we now, this current municipal government looks a lot to Vienna, and they invite a lot of people from Vienna to come and explain their history. And the truth is that they are 100 years ago ahead from us, no? So it's kind of unfair and disturbing to compare your city to Vienna, because we had completely different history, no? Like here, we did have social housing, like Gonzalo mentioned, but problem is that it became private, like until very recently it was sold, and after 20 years it became part of the private sector. So we are also very, very scarce of public or affordable housing at all. I think there's measures that are possible, and we are also now trying to see how we can, as society, as organized society with these communities, how can we intervene into private sector to make it affordable again. And I think we need to use every single measure. Sometimes we are critical to certain things that the governments do, but the truth is that probably we need them all in order to move fast to this goal, to improve affordability, to improve the efficiency, and to improve the comfort of people. So I think we need to consider every single measure. So we talk about cooperative housing, but in our case, we also we support measures of rent control, of right of first refusal to buy from big landlords. So we think that every single measure is needed in order to move fast to this objective that society really needs.
Thank you so much, Carlos. We now will make a pause in this session, and we will start with the 5 parallel sessions, and they will begin at 3:30. So at this moment, I will say thank you to you all, and we will be here in a few minutes to start, I think, when we have the good conditions, 3:30, as I said, and now I will respect you. Please see you.